Here's what's coming up on Network Africa. Cameroon rolls out the world's first routine vaccine program against malaria. Over 10,000 people infected with cholera as Zambia intensify efforts to curb the disease. Plus, Egypt's president says he will protect Somalia against any threat during his meeting with Somalia's president, Hassan Mohamud. And welcome to the program this week. I'm Layo Olarinde. We begin with health matters as Cameroon is rolling out the world's first routine vaccine program against malaria. This is in a global fight projected to save thousands of children's lives across the continent. The World Health Organization approved RTSS vaccine is targeting infants in Cameroon's 42 worst affected districts. The rollout is being described by health officials as a milestone in the decades-long effort to curb malaria in the continent. The Central African country will be the first country to administer doses through a routine immunization program, following successful pilot campaigns in Kenya, Ghana, and Malawi. According to Global Vaccine Alliance, Gavi, 20 other countries aim to roll out this program this year. The 4-dose vaccine is only about 30% effective and protection begins to fade after several months. Zambia continues to struggle to contain a major cholera outbreak in which the health ministry says has infected more than 10,000 citizens and killed over 400 others. Lusaka's National Hero Stadium had to be turned into a temporary treatment facility for patients to receive medical attention even as families await news on their loved ones. Well, the state's health minister, Sylvia Masebo, visited the stadium, calling on the country to come together and ensure getting to zero deaths. Dr. Kennedy Chikenda, who's a local doctor at the facility, explains that many patients are coming in for treatment too late due to the stigma surrounding the disease. Well, local authorities have instructed schools to remain shut after the end of year holidays to prevent further spread. The government has also announced a mass vaccination program and is providing 2.4 million liters of clean water a day to affected communities in the country.
The main challenge actually is that the patients are coming in late. They are coming in very dehydrated. By the time you try to resuscitate them, they would have already lost enough fluids that will tip them into death. And the main issue as to why they are coming in late, really, from what I've noticed and the histories I've gotten, is that there is stigma around this area. They feel like if they come in, then they say, no, I had cholera. Like going back that side in the communities, they'll be looked upon in a very different way. So the main challenge is them coming at the facility quite late.
Mumbi Kasesha is a broadcast journalist joining us now from Lusaka. Thank you so much for your time on the program. A hectic few months Zambia has seen, since October, dealing with this cholera crisis. How is the health ministry coping?
Well, I think, finally we can say that the government now, through the Ministry of Health and other stakeholders, and must also recognize the fact that this is a multifaceted fight. It's not just the fight for the Ministry of Health. So what basically the government has done to curb the spread of cholera is that the government of the Republic of Zambia has quickly implemented measures such as enhancing sanitation and providing access to clean water. Notably, the government has taken the lead in addressing cases associated with shallow wells by barring them, while also supplying clean water through water bowsers in affected areas. Hygiene education promotion, absolutely important, is also underway, utilizing radio and television broadcasts for communication on preventative measures. We've seen the government, obviously, with other stakeholders swing into action to ensure that the most affected communities are educated on the measures to prevent contracting cholera. Mobile public service announcements have moved into the communities to also sensitize communities across the country. Biggest challenge that most of these unplanned settlements, the high density areas, are facing is effective sewage disposal, which is posing a very, very big challenge to this fight, particularly in high density neighborhoods surrounding the capital and other districts across the country. Must also inform you that majority of these high density areas are unplanned settlements, so there is no proper sanitation put in place. Most of these are using pit latrines as toilets and shallow wells as sources of water. This is a rainy season, so once these places are flooded, you have a mixture of fecal matter coming from the pit latrines mixing with shallow wells. But we've seen government obviously swinging into action. There's 1.4 million cholera vaccines that were procured by government, and these are being administered to citizens living in the most affected areas. So government is addressing this the siege of in cholera cases by implementing some of the measures I've outlined.
Indeed, a number of restrictions there you've mentioned, but how is the vaccination drive going? We know, the World Health Organization had given the country some millions of vaccines.
Well, obviously, what the Minister of Health, Honorable Sylvia Masebo, did and her team was to first and foremost, administer the vaccines to communities that affected the most with the outbreak of this disease. We've seen, obviously, it's not just the World Health Organization. We've seen the Chinese government and the other, foreign governments that have come in, offering aid in terms of the chlorine that should be distributed in these communities to ensure that the water that these communities are consuming is well treated. So we've had quite a number of positive interventions that the government has put in place. And this is a reason we are at a point where we've seen the government obviously trying to curb the increase of the numbers. But again, the biggest challenge is majority of these unplanned settlements are occupied by people who are not well informed on matters to do with hygiene and sanitation. So we continue receiving these cases because majority of people do not understand where this disease is coming from. And, with communication that is coming in only when this issue has happened. Also, that's another deficiency. We need to be proactive, especially when it comes to communication. I'm a communicator myself. I'm coming from a communication background, and I would say that we have a huge deficiency when it comes to communication around hygiene and proper sanitation. I think this should be a 360 effort every single day of the year. Not only when we are approaching the rainy season, that's when you start communicating, because by that time a lot of people would not have gotten the message, and then before we realize that we are having an outbreak like what we are experiencing now.
All right. Oh, well, Mumbi Kesesha, broadcast journalist in Lusaka, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Tanzania's meteorological agency is warning of heavy rains for the rest of the month as floods have damaged houses and roads, with an unspecified number of people dead in the commercial capital of Dar es Salaam. For 2 days now, heavy rains have pounded the country. Some houses near rivers collapsed and some roads and bridges are destroyed, making it difficult to navigate through the city. The main Bagamoyo road that joins the city to the northern regions is also inaccessible after a downpour flooded the area. President Samia Suluhu Hassan has asked citizens to take precautions by avoiding affected areas. She's also called on the rescue authorities to make sure that the rains do not cause any more deaths. And at least 23 people have died and over 6,000 others displaced in the Republic of Congo, Brazzaville, as extreme rainfall hits the country. Heavy downpours since October 2023 have led to banks around the Ubangi River to burst, promoting a government declaration of flood emergency. Ojean Zlak, from the Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, says the United Nations is responding to the flood disaster that's unprecedented in scale for 6 decades.
In Congo, that's the Congo where Brazzaville is the capital, the United Nations is responding to a flood disaster unprecedented in scale for 6 decades and with hundreds of thousands of people in need of humanitarian assistance. Extreme rainfall since October last year has led the banks around the Ubangi River, which is a tributary to the Congo River, to burst. A flood emergency was officially declared by the government on the 29th of December. 9 out of the country's 12 departments remain underwater, and a total of 1.8 million people are affected. The floods have left local communities without shelter or access to primary health services. Villages, schools and health facilities have been flooded, and many water points and sanitation facilities are no longer functional. There's limited or no access to clean drinking water or sanitation in the worst affected areas, and that is in the central and north of the country. Some 27,000 children are out of school. Access is a challenge because of the floods, and many villages can only be reached by boat or canoe. UN agencies have developed a response plan with the government with a total budget of some $26 million. The priority sectors include shelter, food security, nutrition, health and water sanitation and hygiene. But that's just the immediate response. The floods could also have longer-term consequences. Our initial assessment estimates that 2,300 hectares of cultivated land have been flooded, which raises concern that means to produce food, for example, fruit trees and fishing gear, has been destroyed and livestock has perished.
Kenya's Foreign Minister Musalia Mudavadi has denied reports of deteriorating relations between his country and its neighbors, despite a number of recent disputes which he insists are being resolved diplomatically. Well, Kenya has a pending oil distribution case with Uganda and only last week settled an air travel dispute with Tanzania. Earlier this month, Sudan recalled its envoy after Nairobi hosted the head of the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, Mohamed Dagalo, who is engaged in a civil war with the Sudanese army. In December, the Democratic Republic of Congo also recalled its ambassador in Nairobi after a new coalition of Congolese rebels was formed in the Kenyan capital. However, in a speech on Sunday, Mr. Mudavadi insists that Kenya is on the front line in championing peace in the East African region. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi says his country will protect Somalia against any threat in what can be described as an indirect response to recent Ethiopia's move to access the seaport of Somaliland. Mr. el-Sisi held talks in Cairo on Sunday with Somali President Hassan Sheikh Mohammed. Well, in a news conference after their meeting, he rejected a deal that was signed earlier this month between Ethiopia and the breakaway region of Somaliland to give landlocked Ethiopia access to its coast. Well, joining us now is Edward Iranian, the VOA's correspondent in Cairo. Hello, Edward. Thank you for joining us on the program. We've heard strong supportive words from President El-Sisi to Somalia on this dispute with Ethiopia. What's the reason behind, the president's staunch support to Ethiopia?
Well, Lyle,
to Somalia, I beg your pardon, to Somalia.
Yeah, Egypt has been supporting Somalia for a long time, so that's nothing new. Supporting it diplomatically is an issue that's perhaps a little different. But of course, Egypt is opposed to Ethiopia on many fronts due to the dam that Ethiopia built that is somewhat constricting or creating fears of constricting the flow of water down the Nile, which would ultimately hurt Egypt seriously. So I think that's probably the main motivation. Egypt is also drawn closer to other regional allies that could possibly be used in an eventual tug of war with Ethiopia, Somalia, Sudan, South Sudan, and really, this is just part of regional politics, I think. You see this with so many countries. They're allying with the enemies of their enemies. So it's sort of a diplomatic issue, I guess.
All right, then we'll wait and see how it all pans out. But thank you so much, Edward Iranian, the VOA's correspondent in Cairo.
My pleasure, Lyle.
Welcome back to Network Africa. At the Al Arish port in Egypt's North Sinai Governorate, the Dixmude, a French helicopter carrier, has docked to provide treatment to wounded Palestinians in an onboard field hospital, even as fighting rages 50 kilometers away in the besieged Gaza Strip. Helicopter ambulances are on standby on the deck, even as wounded Palestinians receive medical care from doctors and medical crews in wards on the lower levels of the ship. The Dixmude is reportedly staffed by at least 70 medics and has treated more than 120 patients since arriving in the Sinai Peninsula. The incumbent leader of the Democratic Republic of Congo, President Felix Tshisekedi, has been sworn in for a second term in office. At the Pentecost Matthias Stadium in Kinshasa, President Tshisekedi took an oath of office after arriving at the stadium alongside officials and members of the Congolese Constitutional Court. Well, the event drew thousands of Congolese citizens and saw the presence of several African heads of state and foreign envoys. During his inaugural speech, President Tshisekedi pledged to unite the country and also to put an end to the armed conflicts that have displaced millions of people in the eastern region of the country. The 60-year-old leader, who secured victory with 73% of the votes, promised to build a strong, united and prosperous nation during his second term. Meanwhile, celebrations filled Liberia's capital Monrovia as Joseph Boakai was sworn in as the country's new president after narrowly defeating incumbent Judge Ware in November's runoff vote. According to reports, the 79-year-old failed to reach the end of his inauguration speech as he appeared to almost pass out and had to be held up at the swearing-in ceremony. He had already been speaking for around 30 minutes when it became clear that he had difficulty talking. Mr. Boakai was then surrounded by his aides and members of the Executive Protection Service and escorted from the ceremony at the Capitol building, which is the seat of the legislature. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has met with Cape Verde's Prime Minister Ulysses Correa e Silva as the top U.S. diplomat begins a four-nation tour in Africa. Mr. Blinken's itinerary also includes a visit to Porto de Praia, which received funding for modernization efforts from the U.S. government's Millennium Challenge Corporation. Ahead of the trip, the State Department in U.S. said that Mr. Blinken's trip would emphasize U.S.'s infrastructure investment in Africa as a way to boost two-way trade, create jobs at home and on the continent, and also help Africa compete in the global marketplace. Well, Mr. Blinken is also expected to visit Côte d'Ivoire, attending an Africa Cup of Nations football match between the host nation and Equatorial Guinea. Nigeria and Angola are the other two countries he's also expected to tour. Nigeria's relations with India has come a long way, even before Nigeria's independence, and has strengthened over the years. Well, this was reiterated by the Indian Foreign Minister Subramanian Jaishankar, who is making his first visit to the country. Mr. Jaishankar gave a lecture at the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs in Lagos, titled Resetting the Global Agenda, the Role of India and Global South. Our Foreign Affairs correspondent Amarachi Ubani reports.
The Indian Foreign Minister's visit was a special one at the NIIA Ultra-Modern Conference Chamber, as not just members of his delegation, but members of the diplomatic corps, political analysts, traditional rulers, members and fellows of the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs settled in for a lecture. Chairing the occasion was former Nigerian External Affairs Minister Professor Bolaji Akinyemi and the Director General of the Institute.
We are resetting the global agenda.
Mr. Subramanian Jaishankar began his address by extolling relations between Nigeria and India, and even the NIIA.
Our annual trade fluctuates between $12 to $15 billion, and quite rightfully, we have today a relationship that we characterize as a strategic partnership.
He blames globalization for deep economic concentrations, as much of the world depends on production by a few geographies.
Now, while globalization has had many positive results, it has also undeniably led to very deep economic concentrations. That much of the world today depends on production of a few geographies. Now, it worked when we believed that the entire world could be run in the manner in which Japanese cars are produced in Nagoya, that everything came just in time to meet the requirements of the day. We were wrong, but we didn't know it. And then COVID came. And COVID brought home to every one of us that the most basic things of our life, we were often dependent on suppliers and producers from far away.
He was later bombarded with questions from across the hall, ranging from economic to political issues. During his visit to Nigeria, Mr. Jaishankar will be co-chairing the 6th India-Nigeria Joint Commission meeting with his Nigerian counterpart and inaugurating the 3rd edition of the Nigeria-India Business Council meeting. Amarachi Ubani, Channel Television News.
Still in Nigeria, in Oyo State, it's been 6 days since a massive explosion rocked Ibadan, the state capital, as work continues on site and the debris evacuated. The Nigeria Society of Engineers, Geologists, and members of the Nigeria Nuclear Regulatory Authority are all on ground working to assess and ascertain the integrity of the affected buildings. Our correspondent, Bukola Oriowo, reports.
Engineers from the Nigeria Society of Engineers getting their brief before setting out for the task ahead.
One person with a camera and all the other things. Please, let's do that. And then
government's mandate has been increased from 250-meter radius to 500, and all affected houses in this catchment area must be assessed.
the explosion has had an adverse effect on a lot of houses, and so it is necessary to check these houses before we can assessing it to be sure that people can actually go in to see if they can bring out their things and probably start doing repairs. It's just for safety.
Structural engineers involved in the project say the impact is massive and affected areas must be critically examined.
Most of the buildings where we have checked, we have some degree of structural defects, some depending on the severity, and then mostly the roofs have been ripped off, and that has also impacted on the finishes, the roofing, ceiling, and all that.
The incident manager says search and rescue is over now, and now at the recovery stage.
We await the decision of the government of Oyo State regarding these structures that are very unstable that are around, either to pull them down with the permission of the owners of such structures.
The first phase of this disaster has just been concluded. The debris have been removed from this area, from the immediate center where the disaster took place. Other areas surrounding this place are still currently being assessed. What will happen to them, we will know in the course of events in the days ahead. Meanwhile, engineers are on site to assess every area affected in 500-meter radius of this place. We'll get this result in the days ahead as we monitor events unfolding on this developing story. From Bodija, Ibadan, the state capital, Bukola Oriowo, Channels Television News.
And finally on the program, Orthodox Christians in Ethiopia have celebrated Timket as the festival that marks the baptism of Jesus in the capital, Addis Ababa. The UNESCO-inscribed festival of the Epiphany began over the weekend with the ritual of each church carrying a tablet, a sacred replica of the Ark of the Covenant. Hundreds of thousands of people in white robes gathered to sing spiritual songs and chant. In Jan Meda, thousands also gathered for prayers and liturgical services. Priests sprinkled holy water on the assembled congregation commemorating Christ's baptism. That's all on Network Africa for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Layo Olarinde.